when did Jesus evangelize the disciples, and when did the disciples start being disciples?
Yeah.
And when you think about him, you're like, wait a second. Like, so my answer to is, I think the majority, and I think the ideal way would be, is the discipleship precedes evangelism, right? Like, if it's up, in, and out, like I'm in relationship with people, and I'm intentional, and I don't think you can, accidentally disciple someone, just be around, right? But there's intentional, and the same thing with me having people, my discipleship photos where it's like they're not quite to that place of making Jesus, number one in their life. And then they start being discipled, and they go, yeah, this is the thing I want. I want to be a part of this.
Created on purpose and for purpose.
Everybody, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast. Daron Earlewine, your host, and I'm really stoked for this conversation we're going to have for the next 3 episodes. We're right at the end of our relationship series, and if you've been with us for the past 6 weeks, we talked about relationships up with God, that kind of vertical relationship, and we spent 3 weeks. We had PJ Towle and my wife, Julie Earlewine, in. We talked about relationships in with one another, and I was thinking, who could I get to spend 3 episodes talking about relationships out with the world and the idea of really the mission of God. And immediately my thought went to one of my longest running friends here in Indy, and somebody that I respect to the deepest levels. And I'm so stoked to have Eric Maitland on the podcast today. Eric, welcome, bud.
Man. It's so great to be back on the podcast.
I know it's been a
couple
minute,
years,
right?
Yeah.
So,
and we got to expand your friend network if you're calling me in for 3 episodes on this. But it's an honor to be here, brother. Thank you.
Eric, I've known you since, I want to say like 2008, 2009, maybe even before that. So I could intro you, but why don't you give the folks, like you said, you've been on the episode, you've been on the podcast before. We talked about your story in that episode. It's been years ago.
Yeah.
So maybe, I know some people are still catching up on episodes. We do put one out every single week, but somebody may not want to go back and get episode 22 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Give us a little intro to Eric Maitland.
Yeah. I am a local, musician and musicianary.
Musicianary, what's that?
Musicianary, that's the fancy one-word way of explaining, my heart and my life calling, to use music in moments that really help move people towards Jesus,
Yeah.
And so discovered just a passion for music in college. I grew up in a small town, so I always tried to be good at sports. There wasn't really a music scene where I grew up, but when I got to IU, just started playing guitar, playing keys, playing in bands, fell in love with music. And about that time, I really found Christ in a very real way. I like to say he was my savior. I believed in him before, but there was an experience I had, a moment that kind of led to the rest of my life where I encountered his love, I encountered him, and that gift and that passion for music, I wanted to use it for him. I wanted to use it in ways that would help people join the conversation of kingdom and gospel and figure out who God is, and what he's like. And so, musicianary. There you go.
Awesome. I tell the story, and I don't always tell the story with you here, so you can fill in the gaps of where my memory doesn't serve me well. So we're both type 7s on the Enneagram, so we're moving pretty fast through life, forgetting a lot of the details.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of editing for Darren.
My recollection is one of the first times I remember meeting you, I'm pretty sure I was leading The Rising, was a young adult ministry at East 91st Street Christian Church. And I remember talking to you after one of those gatherings. And at that point, we had just started to dabble with the very first beginnings of what was Pub Theology. I think maybe we were a couple months or maybe a year into it. And I remember us talking, and I don't remember, fill in the blanks for me, like, did you just come to visit that night? Had you been coming for a while? And then the second question is, had you guys started Mayela Rickshaw yet at that point?
Yeah, man, this is funny. So, mutual friend, Joe Elliott, we went to college together, and we both kind of came back to the Lord together in this ministry called Greek InterVarsity. So Joey's one of my oldest friends since school, and he had been going to East 91st Street where you were working, and he said, you got to meet this guy because he kind of looks like you, and he's also using music to go out into bars and to really take that conversation way outside the walls of the church. And just context for people who don't know my story at all, like ever since that moment in college, I threw my whole life at just trying to go out and reach people, you know, for the kingdom and using music. So I did that overseas. We were doing international tours. We were using music concerts, places like Jamaica to help get people into recovery homes. We were doing it in China, where you had to be careful and you had to be kind of secure how you shared the gospel.
Yeah.
And so working with street teams, because we couldn't overtly talk about Christ on platforms there, places like India, Russia, a lot of these different countries. And then when we were stateside, we loved trying to push the limits of how could we get Christian music and the message of Jesus outside the walls of churches better. And when I found out about Pub Theology, what you guys were doing, I'm like, I cannot wait to meet this guy. And I legit thought you looked like me when I met you, and that never happens. People be like, oh, all you white people look the same. No, I saw you. I was like, man, we kind of have like the same five head or something. I don't know what it was, jawline. So big fan. Just hearing the way you teach, I was like, all right, I could listen to that guy talk about this for a long time. That's good, because 7 Enneagram, But when I started seeing you be able to take that same gift and use it in the everyday spaces and places like you have, in bars and different places, it's like, this is going to be fun. We got to work together. So we were really launching this local band, Mayela Rickshaw. It's a crazy name because it's a crazy band. And we were like, what if we just took all the music everybody knows and loves and hates to love, like the ones that are, like Beck, Loser. You hate to love that song, but when you hear it done on folk instruments, you can't help but sing along. We wanted it to be fun. We wanted it to be interactive, bring joy to people's lives when we went in on a Friday or Saturday. And also, we were just really inspired by what you guys were doing, too. And so my best friend, Nathan Cladd, who I grew up with, same small town, he plays fiddle and mandolin and can sing like anywhere from hip-hop to Christina Aguilera. He's
Crazy
just
talent.
hilarious. And so we had started putting this thing together, and it was just a lot of fun getting to work together even at that capacity, and to start bringing some hope and joy and charity into our clubs around the city together. It was really cool.
Yeah. And it was so cool to see how God's kind of woven our story together. When we met then, you guys get Rickshaw going. We've got Pub going. We did multiple events through the years. Then, the kind of crazy story that got me connected to Josh Hoosman, the founding pastor of Mercy Road, before it was even Mercy Road. Then you get pulled in to be their first worship leader, and you've done that for over a decade, working with Mercy Road. And that kind of pulled me back into, after I left East Side First, a couple years after that, getting more involved with Mercy Road. And that's obviously been, my kind of main church now for the past decade that I've been partnering with. And so it's just we have been connected through music, through mission, and then just through friendship for a long time. And, Eric, what I love when I look at your life, and like you talked about, it's from the drop, man. From the time you started following Jesus, you immediately understood this idea of that a relationship with Jesus, right? It's our life is up with Him, it's in with others, but there has to be that out part of it, right? There's this thing that Jesus said right before He ascended into heaven. So it was like the last thing He said, which usually the last things you say to people, you want to be pretty memorable and pretty weighty, right? And He's like, hey, here's the deal. Like, we're going to go, you're going to go and make disciples. Like, that's the mission. And you've understood that. And you've done it through, tons of different ways. And we'll probably talk in the next episode about what you're doing right now with, with recovery ministry around the state. It's very inspiring, very necessary. But I was just so stoked to be able to have this conversation because for me, Eric, growing up in the church my whole life, and being involved, and right now, for the past probably decade, I've kind of always had one foot inside the church, one foot out. And it took me a while to figure out that that's who God created me to be. That's kind of where I need to be. And I can remember as a kid being really, really frustrated. My dad was a pastor. We're small churches. I think when we took the one church we were at in Arizona for like 11 years, I think they were running like 18 people or something.
Right on.
Yeah, it's huge. And, over the next 11 years, it grew to 50, then 75, then back to 50. I mean, it was a small church, and I would say growing up, and I didn't have the words to say this, right? But what I felt is I don't know that I can be a part of the Jesus thing because there was something in me that was knowing that the Great Commission had to be obeyed, and that's where the action was. But then growing up and going, I don't see anyone actually doing that, and I think it's a major thing we're missing in a lot of our faiths. The illustration I've heard it used is like a stool. There's like 3 legs of a stool, a 3-legged stool, right? This up, in, and out. they have to be balanced, right? Or you're out of balance in your relationships in general. And that was my experience growing up. And so a lot of my life has been dedicated to figure out how to keep that balanced. And obviously for me, that reaching out to the world part, is a big deal. How, for you, man, right off the bat, what do you think made you get it from the get-go?
Man, that's a good question. I'm so glad that this podcast is so devoted to the conversation of, instead of being like born to figure out who you're supposed to be. No, it's like you're born to be this version of you that is only you, and God has uniquely gifted and created each of us so differently.
Yeah.
And I'd say when you we are hybrids. That's how C.S. Lewis, one of these books that he wrote, it's just satire, but it's so profound. Screw Tape Letters. You got the uncle demon talking to the nephew demon, and he's like, make sure your Christian doesn't get on his knees when he prays, because these humans are hybrids. They're half animal, half spirit, and what they do with their bodies affects their spirits, basically, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful if you're a human being and you're watching this podcast, because usually I think your audience is predominantly humans. You are a hybrid.
We do big with kangaroos.
Exactly.
We're huge in Australia with kangaroos.
I mean, we leave this going on YouTube when we leave the house, so our like Australian cattle dogs can just binge.
Yeah, they love it.
They love it. But if you're a human and you're watching this, you are a hybrid, and God's spirit and your spirit are made to be intimately connected. But if you've lived a lot of your life without that experience, it's just amazing what it feels like when it first happens. And I almost feel like you get these big, profound, clear snapshots. Again, the clarity that's there in these thin places when God seems so real and you become maybe aware of his presence for the first time. I sometimes explain that experience I had in college like it was almost like I was healed and transformed from the inside out. All my needs were met from the inside out, and all of a sudden I could see everybody else. It was like that, But with that clarity, you also get this clarity around some of the things that you care a lot about, that are natural for you, that are the way you would do it if you were left to your own, without all the things that culture's telling you you're supposed to do. Well, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. You should do this. And I'll tell you what, man, when God's spirit and my spirit collided that day, that's what came out of that experience, was this, I can't not tell my fraternity brothers what just happened. Like, I don't know how I could possibly not tell them. Like, there wasn't a version of me that was like, I think I'm going to come up with a strategy, and spend a few years going to seminary to figure out how to tell them No, I just told them the only way I could, and it wasn't manifested. It wasn't somebody guilted me into. I had to.
Yeah.
And I would say that's maybe not the answer you want to hear, but like that first encounter with the Lord, that first season of just sharing that zeal, it carried into a calling in music ministry, and a calling in global missions, and a calling in church planting. And, you mentioned Mercy Road earlier. I think that church means a lot to us, because if you're somebody who's never heard of Mercy Road, I'm not saying like, hey, our church is the best. Sure. Everybody should go to our church. But you should talk that way about your church if you go there. But it means a lot to me and to you, I know, because that up in and out expression, Mike Breen is a great author who got some of this from as well. But that expression of making sure that we're not just a church that gathers on a Sunday for an upward experience where we come together. And a lot of times I feel like we're not even ourselves in that gathering. But, if that's all you get is that upward gathering, and there's never the chance to be the church scattered throughout the week, and there's never the opportunity to be alone with the Lord, and to really get an imagination for what that part of your relationship looks like, to spend time with the one you love. So up in and out, I mean, that was just huge. But Mercy Road has always been missional. Yeah. And I told Josh, I was like, I've never helped plant a U.S. church. I usually just complain about U.S. churches because it's all about the show or the getting it right. I grew up in a traditional church, and I love my church. I love it more now than I ever have before. I love how faithful they are. I love how loving they are. But my goodness, a lot of tradition, not super relevant, and not somewhere I would have invited my friends. Yeah. And so I love that Josh and you and I are three people who are kind of kindred in that we wanted a church we could invite our friends from bars, our fraternity brothers from college, or our friend who doesn't know God at all and hates Christianity, but here's this space where he could actually join that conversation and not feel like his hair is going to catch on fire. Yeah. So Mercy Road in and of itself was evangelistic and valued discipling, which is some of what we're talking about in this series as well, which I love. So
I love that you brought it back to when you came to faith. When you began then to just naturally as Jesus would say, we're going to look at the scripture later, right? To be his witnesses, right? Like you were like, I witnessed this in my life and I need to actually testify what I've witnessed. What kind of impact did it start having in your immediate, those in relationships that like the fraternity, for instance? Did you see any mission happen through that?
Yeah. In fact, as I look back now,
Yeah.
I'm really proud of that 20-year-old
Wow.
or
Yeah.
22-year-old, however I was when it really happened. Because, I mean, I don't know that I have that kind of courage and audacity even now to do some of the things that guy did. And because, again, I didn't go try to figure out the right equation to do this. I just went and did it.
Yeah.
God showed up and met me and my brothers in such a real way that we actually saw immediate fruit from just 1-2 people in a fraternity just having encounters with the living God. And like when you're in a frat, you're not having Bible studies, you're not having a church service, you're partying and you're, trying to pick up girls and you're trying to be the coolest frat and, and do the craziest things and throw the best parties and to take kind of who we were, these crazy dudes that loved having a good time, but then mixing it with this purpose and this desire for actual, authentic, intimate relationships with each other, a desire to know each other for the things you're not real proud of too, and to be able to sit with each other and be able to have like real brotherhood, not the kind that we would try to sell when you're Russian, but like real brotherhood. And we started seeing that happen. We started seeing a room in the frat where you could come in just as you were. I made myself available on weekends. Guys would come in and just share where they really were. Sometimes they had to be 3 sheets to the wind before they could talk about it, but then the honesty came out. And they didn't find judgment, They found the only brother who was there sober and ready to hang out and hear about it. But, I mean, one of my friends, he might even watch this for all I know, he was an atheist, Darren. He was kind of our biggest drug dealer at the time and a smart atheist. And we used to debate about the existence of God because I wasn't like a Jesus follower, but I was a believer, you know what I mean?
Sure,
There's a difference.
Yeah.
And I would at least be like, dude, God's got to be real. And we were both studying some religious studies and stuff. And he was totally an atheist, could argue why he was an atheist. He comes back the same semester I came back as like my eyes are open to the Lord and this new thing. He comes back and he's wearing this Urban Outfitters shirt that said, Jesus surfs without a board. And I'm like, what's this all about? He was like talking to his great aunt or something on the phone, and some other voice started telling him about Jesus. And so he's a believer, and I'm hearing his weird story, and I'm sharing my weird story, and all of a sudden there's 2 of us. And he'd bring the pizza when we'd throw our Bible study. Like, that wasn't my gift of evangelism. That was God already having a story that was playing out among 80 dudes living in a mansion at IU in that year. Yeah. And it played out, and it just like, it kept spreading, man. There was like almost 10% of the guys by the end of a couple of years said, profess the faith in Jesus, and we're like going to this Bible study. It's crazy, man.
See, what I love about that, Eric, and I want to get back, like we're talking about the Great Commission, right? Co meaning with, mission, right? We have this mission, this great mission with God. And, Jesus says this, the Great Commission, it's in Matthew chapter 28, if you don't know where it's at. Verses 18 and 20, Jesus says this, right? He's about he's died, he's resurrected, he's about to go back into heaven. He's got the 11 bros with him. And he comes to them and he says, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And I love this part. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And what I love about your story, Eric, what I love about us trying to get our mind around this idea of relationships out is it's usually a really fearful thing that I think we have if we're Christians. I'm going to go out and share my faith. What if I had all the right answers? I don't have a Bible degree. I might mess it up. Or the thought of, if it's everybody, right? All the nations, I don't even know where to start. So I'm so overwhelmed by the need, so overwhelmed by how big it is, so overwhelmed by my own sense of inadequacy. There we go.
You got it.
Like, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. And I'm assuming I'm alone in the process. And then your story is like, well, I don't have to reach everybody in the world right now, but I had this thing happen. This is real. This is good news. I have bros that I live with, that I'm in relationship with. Now I have this relationship up with God. So I'm going to start just telling them what's going on. And what you found is like, God was like, hey, I've already been here at work. Like, I'm with you.
He was already doing it.
I'm so dedicated to my mission. Like, I'm serious about this, right? We're actually trying to change the whole known world, right? And thanks for joining what I'm already doing. I've already got pieces moving. I just need you to be a witness. And then you see him start to do it, right? And so my next question for Eric would be, can you, like, talk about that three-legged stool, the up, the in, the out. That is, our life is relationships. Everything else is just details. Can you even fathom, maybe I should ask it this way, what do you think your relationship with God would look like right now if we went and pushed Control, Alt, Delete and erased all of the mission part that you've been involved in the past 20 years?
That's interesting. That'd be a pretty short story at this point. I mean, that's not like a brag. That's just like, that's kind of what drives today and tomorrow for me. And it has it. And I want to say this, though, because that is a big call. You just read a big scripture.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about, we'll probably hit on this in this episode too, but one of the things that we've done a disservice is by taking the American mindset and trying to cram Christianity into that. And so you got this very me-based Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, how am I going? You said, how am I going? Like, this was spoken to one of the smallest nations in the world. Most of them aren't literate, and they've got their one God. And then it's like a Mac and PC scenario. You got Mac, and you got every other computer in the world. So they're hearing this commandment from the son of a carpenter who just raised from the dead and has been healing everybody that had need around them for 3 years straight. They've seen him do it. They got to help him do it. He taught them how to do it. And they didn't hear that. How am I going to? They're like, how are we? And their minds are blown because they just saw it done. They're like, well, we know he's already doing it.
Yeah.
Let's just do that. Let's just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not them doing it. I think that they knew pretty quick. I like to think of global missions as being like when I was young. My dad, he loves yard work. For some reason, my dad loves yard work. Yeah. Like, we live, like, I grew up in like a woods almost. And so you're not just raking leaves and nuts like a couple times a year. That's like all you do. So I like have this tick that happens when I start doing yard work. It just like takes me back, like PTSD or something. But my dad, he loved it when we all went in the yard and worked together. Well, when you're like 6 or 7 years old, helping your dad rake leaves in a woods, you're not really helping that much.
Right. Yeah. You're there.
But man, does it mean a lot to your dad that you're there with him.
That's good.
And you're helping fill up your little bucket of Buckeyes. You know what I mean? That's global missions. Like, this is Dad's really doing it, but he wants me to do it with him. So I'll come put my coat on and pick up some Buckeyes. That's about all you should probably set your sights on, is like, let's go do it. We're made for it. Like, Jesus is like, man, I got food y'all don't even know about. They're like, well, who brought up a sandwich? He's like, doing my Father's will is my food. So there's a lot of starving Christians. Like, I am the most selfish missionary, musicianary, however, identify myself in that regard, because I don't do this out of altruism all the time. It is like a selfish desire because I love how it makes me feel in my relationship with God. It is so life-giving, Darren, to spend time, and my faith doesn't grow in the pew very well.
Yeah.
I was trained by, Jim, Debbie, and Levon, who were musicianaries way before I ever was. They had done this for like 30, 40 years in all these countries, like over like 40 countries.
Yeah.
And they would teach us stuff like, hey, just so you know, the tools for the harvest are not found on the pew. They're out in the field.
Yeah.
So you better get out in the field. And if you don't have a field to work, like, come work in ours for a while, and they literally let Jillian and I work in their field for years and helped apprentice us to do this. So don't do it alone. Don't even try to do it alone. There's no I in global missions. It's like, Dad's already doing it.
Yeah.
Let's help him out in the yard,
Yeah. A quick commercial break here on the podcast. I want to tell you a story about a conversation I had a couple weeks ago with a faithful podcast listener like yourself. We started talking about spiritual DNA, the online course that I've created that helps you discover who you were born to be. And I said, hey, have you gone through spiritual DNA yet? And I'm assuming they listen to the podcast, like, hasn't everyone gone through spiritual DNA? They said, you know what? No, I haven't. And I said, well, why not? And they said, I haven't gotten around to it yet. but I really want to discover who God's created me to be. So if that's you, today's your day. Here's what you need to do. I need you to go to DaronEarlewine.com/spiritual DNA. That's where you can get the course, and I want to give you a discount because you're part of the podcast family. So once you go to buy the course, go to the promo code and use promo code podcast. You're going to get 20% off the course today, all right? That's your next step. Do it. DaronEarlewine.com/spiritual DNA. Use promo code podcast and start your journey today to discover who you were born to be. All right, let's get back to the episode. I love it, man. And that's, as I look back, like I think I said about growing up, like it was so dissonant in my brain. This doesn't make sense. You know, like I'm reading the Bible and I'm experiencing this and I have this heart for my friends and all these different things. And then like, I remember going to like the district conference, right, for our churches. And I actually experienced this both in Indiana and Arizona, where like they'd have the district conference, all the churches would come together and they would, you know, report baptisms and stuff, right? And like there'd probably be awards for the church with the most baptisms, right? And there would literally be tons of churches who would report no baptisms this year or last year or the year before that or the year before that. Like there are a group of believers that are doing, and they are a church, and they're going 5, 10 years seeing no one come to faith. And it's like, I don't know how that's possible. But I think it can be possible, but it is a strong indictment kind of on the church of like, you may not actually be a church. You're kind of just a group of people that are getting around and have forgotten that we actually have a mission. But I guess in my experience, it happens almost by accident so much that I'm like, you got to be really trying to not reach people for Jesus, I think, if you're going to go a decade and no one is going to come to faith through your life, you know? And it makes me think about, I remember somebody asking me this question years ago as like, you know, a little like get you kind of question. And I had to struggle with it for a minute. And they asked the question because you see, you know, Jesus saying, hey, we're going to go make disciples. And a lot of times when we talk about about reaching out to the world, I think the word that comes to us is evangelism. We're talking about evangelizing people. And remember this guy coming and saying, hey, what comes first, discipleship or evangelism? And I had to wrestle with it for a minute, you know? Like, what would you say? What comes first, discipleship or evangelism?
Yeah, that to me is kind of like when you're working out at the gym, are you trying to do just strength training or cardio? And it's like, well, what if they're both happening at the same time? Is that wrong? I don't think any of this is supposed to be done alone. I get really worried about the big televangelist, the like one-man rodeo out with building his brand and stuff. And it's like, because the best disciplers I've ever met, they don't evangelize alone. They've always got their disciple with them. Like, how's he going to learn how to, like, and then evangelism, I think of that, you were just throwing the seed, like, Father's the only one that grows this thing. So, you know, you can throw your seed, and you should always be doing that. However you do that, whether you're inviting a friend to a Bible study in your fraternity, whether you're inviting a friend to a church service or to just check out a podcast like this, like you're evangelizing. Just it should be kind of fruit off the tree kind of thing.
Yeah.
Discipling, I think there's a different intentionality that we're called to with discipling. I realize that both should be intentional, don't get me wrong, but I don't know why we separate them so much.
Yeah.
Like they really kind of work best in tandem, and I don't think you can disciple very well without evangelizing. Because if you're with a group of people trying to turn them into somebody like Jesus, and they're not ever evangelizing with you, I don't see how there's real discipling happening either. Yeah. And then vice versa, if you're out as an evangelist building your brand and just all about throwing the seed and never trying to reproduce the character and competency of Christ and letting people see your worst days. Like you used a word when you first invited me into your huddle first, you used the word, I'd like to just change my orbit this year. And if you'd be willing to change yours too, we could orbit together. And in this inner orbit, bro, call me at 3 a.m. if you need, all year. But at the same time, I do want a chance to maybe push on you a little bit more this year and challenge you a little bit more than I have in the past. And let's just kind of orbit tighter this year. Love that. I've had other people really connect with that, and I just own it. I just say I made it up. No, I don't. I give you credit for that. But I think that that's a good, gives you a little imagination for what discipling looks like.
Yeah.
Because I think that when we separate these two as far as we do, it's like, well, evangelism is over here in that part of the food tray, and discipleship's over here. And I'm just like, man, it's really all supposed to be life on life. And you never know. Like some of the guys in my huddle are usually not even Christ followers yet.
Yeah.
So I'm discipling and I'm doing the long game of evangelism, and they may or may not turn out to be the best investment of that time possible. So it takes wisdom to figure out, man, who do I orbit with at that level, you know?
Well, that's the thing that I came to, is realizing, like, and I think somebody, maybe I read this in a book somewhere, I don't know, but somebody posed this question as a follow-up to that one, was like, when did Jesus evangelize the disciples, and when did the disciples start being disciples?
Yeah.
And when you think about him, you're like, wait a second. Like, so my answer to is, I think the majority, and I think the ideal way would be, is the discipleship precedes evangelism, right? Like, if it's up, in, and out, like I'm in relationship with people, and I'm intentional, and I don't think you can, accidentally disciple someone, just be around, right? But there's intentional, and the same thing with me having people, my discipleship huddles, where it's like they're not quite to that place of making Jesus, number one in their life, and then they start being discipled, and they go, yeah, this is the thing I want. I want to be a part of this. And I think some of the struggle in the church is when we separate them, we start thinking about, when you're talking about out, relationships out, that you mean that's when I go make converts. And usually in a Christian mindset, if you're watching the podcast and you're not quite a believer, you're like, why do they keep talking about stuff inside the church? Because that's where we kind of grew up, right? We have episodes where we don't talk necessarily through that lens. But what I see predominantly in the church is, I'm going to get a friendship with somebody strong enough that I could invite them to my church where they could get evangelized. And if they go up front or raise their hand, pastor counts to 3, and I took my buddy and he raised his hand and he became a convert. But I don't have a discipling relationship. And in fact, I've never even I don't understand the Great Commission as something that I'm supposed to actually do, where I'm making disciples. So I think so many people, potentially, I'm making the statement, I can't back it up with absolute facts, although I kind of probably could if I tried for a little bit, is so many converts, I think, then become spiritual orphans.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I came to your church with you, and I raised my hand, and like I made the decision, like God was real. And as a lot of Christians go, man, finish line, I did it. All right, let me go find somebody else my next project, the person I'm going to try to see if I can't get them to go to church. And is that all bad? I'm sure we could have a debate on that, right? Well, people are finding out about Jesus and you're a part of it. I think that's probably a decent first step. But like, coming to the place of realizing, no. Like, the person isn't your project to create a convert. It's the idea of, am I willing to live a life worth imitating, where I would then begin to disciple people, and along the way, they're going to either accept or reject. My whole life is formed around this relationship with Jesus, and I want you to experience that as well. And I see that from the way you told your story. It was like, you have this this connection, this moment with Jesus. Then, your buddy does. Now, all of a sudden, together, you guys are learning to follow Jesus together, and it begins to be this natural thing where other people are pulled into the Great Commission, making disciples, and along that path, they come to the place of going, I'm going to actually be a baptized follower of Jesus. They are evangelized, if you will. And I think we have to see both sides of that coin if we're going to really understand what this idea of a relationship out with the world is. And I think that the way that I want to encourage, as you're listening, as you're watching, is the fact that the Great Commission is not a spectator sport. There is no sideline folks. And I think we have to come to terms with that. If you're like, well, okay, cool. They brought in the missionary to talk about outreach, right? Because that's obviously what the professional Christian people do. I'm more of an encourager. I'm not really a part of the mission. I'm more, like helping out the troops kind of idea. And I know there are different roles and callings, and we talk about that in the podcast all the time, but if we're a follower of Jesus, we're on the field. We're a part of the mission. And like you said, like for me, if I were to take everything of my out part of my relationship with Jesus, I would have given up following Jesus a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because the life I saw was, okay, so at some point you made a decision to have Jesus forgive your sins, and now you're not going to hell, but then you have to go to church all the time, which if your church is boring, it kind of feels like hell. I mean, whatever. Like, I'm going to sit here, try to hear some stuff, maybe get inspired. I'm going to try to stop doing the bad stuff I can't really completely stop doing, and I'm going to sit around and just wait till I go to heaven. And I don't have any idea how my job or my purpose or anything actually interacts with anything of this Jesus deal. I guess I'm just a religious person that goes to church. And the cool part is when I die, I don't have to go to hell. Mm-hmm. Like for me, that would not have done it, for sure. Mm-hmm. But seeing this idea of like, wait a second, not only am I like saved and called and chosen and brought in, but now like I'm being introduced or reintroduced into the original design of humanity, that we join with God to actually see his future become a reality. Like, and I have purpose and meaning and a calling in that. And like the amount of peace, of passion, of purpose, of depth of relationship, of a desire to grow, of a grace-filled, indebted love that I have to who God is, that he's invited me into this. Like, all of it is fueled, I think, by the fact that I get to be a part of his mission.
Mm. I love that, dude. I love it. I have to admit, like, if somebody was like, all right, if that's the case, like, what should be my starting place? Like, what should be my first step? And I think that our go-to question when we approach God is, well, Lord, here I am. I believe in you. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And actually, I if you go back and cite the first time I was on this podcast, I was a younger man in my 30s. I didn't have all this wisdom in my beard yet, right? And I'll say the same thing now. When I asked God that, when I surrendered my life to him, and I find myself living in India for a year, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to stay here the rest of my life or I'm supposed to go back, and I didn't know what I'm supposed to do. And I was fasting for the first time for more than like a day, and I this prolonged fast, trying to like discern, God, what do you want me to do? And I finally felt like I heard from him, and we can have a whole other podcast about hearing the Lord's voice. Not like he opens the clouds and he sounds like, James Earl Jones or something. It's just like, it sounds like your thoughts, but if you get used to hearing it and discerning it, you'll notice like, that's a foreign thought for me.
Yeah.
As I'm asking that question over and over, I felt like the Lord said, you're asking the wrong question. And so I was like, well, what's the right question? And it was, who am I calling you to submit under? Who am I calling you to be discipled by? Who am I calling you to work in their field? It was a call to humility. It was a call to discipleship. And I would say that is the most mature thing, the most wise, humble Christian thing you could possibly do, is humble yourself enough to say, God, who would you have me be discipled by this season? Because maybe you're in your 50s or 60s and you've gone to church a long time. You could totally write that whole book that Darren just said about, the disappointment of your Christian experience. Ask that same question. God, in great humility, I believe that you can lead me to the person that I want to be discipled by. And I don't know why I heard this analogy from our amazing redemptive entrepreneurs from the Praxis Guild here in Indianapolis, and the analogy of like, so often we want to use the apple. Oh, look at this crisp red apple that just won a contest, but you don't realize it's actually the orchard that produces great apples. And not just one apple tree. Like, the healthier the orchard is and the trees around each other, like the healthier your apples are going to get. And we really are built to be in community. So most likely, if you're trying to find a good discipler, they're not going to be like a one-off. Oh, Benny Hinn, the guy in the white suit on that huge stage. Sorry, Benny, if you watch this podcast. He's probably the guy, because I can see him. Often the person you want to disciple you, they're probably in the trenches. You're not going to find them on a platform very often. One of my favorite ones here in our state is Pastor Michael Pirtle, who is a retired Marine who lives in Gary, Indiana, and pours his life out, helping advocate for people coming out of incarceration, advocating for a recovery community. And I watched him. I asked him if I could come follow him for a few days. So I'm absolutely like just throwing myself at trying to become a better discipler. I want to understand this. I think it's the highest calling we have as believers, and I have so many questions around it. I've been trying to crack that code the whole time been a believer. And so any chance I get to orbit closer and be around someone who I consider a great discipler, I try to get some time behind closed doors with them to just see what it looks like to watch their life. And I'm following this guy for like 3 days, and he's so nice to everybody in his community. He was nice to the LGBT community. He was nice to the people in incarceration. He was nice to the people coming out of, who are struggling with substance abuse. He was nice to the women's, abused women's like home that he and his wife started. He was nice to everybody. Then he gets to church, his church. And guess what? It's more like the size of one of your dad's churches. It's not real big. And I found out why pretty quick. That's where he disciples. He was so mean. Like, that's where the Marine came out. And he gets there, and I've watched him all week work his tail off, building his community and ministering to the needs of those in need, advocating for those who did not have a voice. And then I watch him in front of the Christians, and he's so mean. He's like, hey, I'm out here rebuilding the wall. If you're not going to come with me, you might as well not come to this church. It's like, dude, this guy needs to learn how to grow a church, because you're supposed to get like thousands of people, right? And, oh, I loved it, Darren. I loved it. It offended so much of what I've learned about church growth strategies in America. But I saw a discipler decide that this is where I'm going to take my intentional time, and he gave access to these precious people, loved them. I love the love you felt in that room. I saw things like maturity. I saw intentionality. I saw a very high level of challenge that I'm not great at. That's where I'm weakest when it comes to discipling, is challenge. I saw the Marine, and I was like, man, that's who I want to be. So yeah, I love getting to follow disciplers. I have so many questions around this. And you know what? The best parents I ever met, they don't sit there and tell you how great of parents they are. They complain about, oh, it's so hard being a parent. I feel like I'm the worst. My kid did this, or I lost my anger in front of him, and I'm too controlling, or whatever. I hear great parents talk about how terrible a parent they think they are. It's like nobody thinks they're the best. You just go do it. You just go do it. And I just never want to stop doing it. I keep discipling, even if I'm not the best discipler. But that high challenge, man,
it's no joke.
Maturity. Like, what are the people like who you would say, like, if you're looking for a discipler, what are the people like who have been discipled by them? What do the people closest to them look like? And as you know, we got to go to a space in Asia where there is potentially the fastest underground disciple-making movement that's ever happened, recorded. And it's happening in the least likely place where it's never happened. And so we went over with a small film team to see if it's really happening and what are some of the marks of this movement. It's just like watching the book of Acts. I will say that a lot of the reports we're hearing are so filled with miracles and unexplainable supernatural phenomena that it's gonna make some people in the West struggle, because we're kind of like, well, that stuff doesn't quite happen like that anymore, or whatever. It's really fun meeting Christians who've never been taught that. It's really fun meeting Christians that all they know is what they've seen and what they've read in the book of Acts and what they've learned from their disciplers there. So
that's a good tease, because that's the next episode.
Cool.
So perfect tease for the next episode. I want to end it with this, Eric. There's one other time that Jesus gives some commands, a mission to his disciples, and it's after he's resurrected. He's spent 40 days with all of them, and he's about to go back into heaven before he sends the Holy Spirit. So we're in Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 1, and he says this one, right? He says, the Father alone has the authority to set those dates and times. He says, they are not for you to know. Then he says this, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, and in Samaria, and to the very ends of the earth. And what I want to end with is, can you unpack a little bit of that? Because you have that perspective, Eric. You started in the dorm room, started in the frat house, right? And now you're talking about Indy. You're talking about all over the state. And for somebody to say, well, where does it start? What does Jesus mean? What is Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria to the ends of the earth? What does that look like? Can you give us just a quick education on, if we're trying to think about how does this start? What am I responsible for? Do I have to go to India because as Eric did? Like, what was Jesus talking about, and how did the disciples get that? And how does that actually connect with us?
Man, that's great. That's a great question. And I will say this: if I made Pastor Pirtle sound really mean, he's making soldiers.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why he's incredible. And the same thing with what I saw in India, by the way. I went to India originally in my 20s to be a witness and to try to bring the gospel there. I went to India in my 40s to learn how to be a Christian again. I don't want to lose that humility. because you're not going to be able to bear witness to your city, to your region, and to the ends of the earth if you haven't seen the movement of God. Sometimes I think it would do a lot of Christians good to go on short-term mission trips or to start partnering with thriving ministries where you're seeing life change happen. Because if you've forgotten that the gospel is actual good news, you're probably not in a context where it's very good news. Because if you go to church on Sunday and you feel like, gosh, if I really told them where I was right now, they would crucify me here. It's not very good news. If you get to see what Jesus is doing around the state of Indiana right now, where people have literally been dead and in bondage from substance abuse, especially as strong as heroin or fentanyl, and you get to see what life change looks like for someone who's been dead and are alive again, who are lost and they are found, and you get to hear how much life means to someone like that, it's really good news. Really good news. And because of their testimony, I'm a better witness to what Jesus is doing. And I get to bear that witness to my city, to my region, and to the ends of the earth. And so maybe you need to go witness some great, great things. That's what that scripture is about, is being a witness. If you think that your Christianity is what you're supposed to bring to Judea, and Jerusalem and the ends of the earth, you might want to reread that. This has always been about God, what he's doing. It's always going to be about him. And I just, that's all I want to talk about. Like, there's not really I appreciate you asking some of my story, but his story is so incredible. I think it would do us all a lot of good to spend some time being humble enough to say, I think I want to go see what God's doing over here because I've heard something, let's go see what's going on.
Yeah.
Let your faith grow. Let him break that box. And if you go to a church like Darren referred to earlier that hasn't seen people coming to Christ or being baptized in decades, maybe go visit a few others and just remember what he could do, and maybe take that newfound faith back to that church and see if you can see that happen again.
Yeah. And you mentioned that idea of like the how did you say it? The kind of your, what was the three progressions? How you said it? Your region, say that again.
Yeah, I do think that we have a responsibility to be witnesses in our own backyard, which is your own city, your own town.
And that would have been what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about Jerusalem for them, right? That was
where they were.
That was their city.
Yep, that was their city. Judea represents the region. And so for us, I have not even mentioned, but like the work I do predominantly, ever since I became a Christian, is around 2:8 Ministries. It stands for Psalm 2:8, ask me for the nations, that global call. I just was like, I want to point my life at that. We also just needed a random name, 2:8, because then we could be in closed countries where you're not allowed to be a Christian band, and people didn't know what it meant. And so 2:8 Ministries really has always been about that call to the nations. But it's been the last 5 to 7 years that we really felt a strong conviction to come back to Judea and help rebuild some of the walls. When we started realizing we were losing almost 3,000 lives just last year alone to overdoses.
In Judea, you're talking about this region.
This region. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, so I do want to have a presence in my city in Indianapolis, and I do that through my local church, Mercy Road, and then to my region, to Indiana and the Midwest. We focus predominantly on partnering with both recovery and faith efforts that are trying to help people get their comeback story and to help tell the general public the good news. You hear the bad news all the time on the news, but there's a lot of good news, and we need to stop stigmatizing these people and criminalizing them, because they're never going to be reconciled back to us and to God if they're not allowed to come back to their place of worship, their places of work, to be parents again. Like, we gotta make space at the table for them again. So yeah, I think that we have a call, a very clear mandate. It isn't just to go to the nations and say, well, I don't give to a local church. I don't participate in serving in any capacity of my own town, because I give $100 to missions every month. Well, that's not it.
Yeah.
And how are you ever going to be actually known and seen and growing and maturing if your own community doesn't have a chance to know you and to experience your gifts and your gold?
Yeah.
So yeah, we got a call right here in our own backyard, and I'm honored to do it with Mercy Road. Super proud of our church and how we've tried to do our best to really take that one-man rodeo that you see so often in the West and just say, nope, this is our job. Let's train, let's develop, and let's even resource missional communities so that y'all can be these witnesses in your places of work, in a lot of the nonprofit sector that we need help with around the city and the state. And however God has uniquely called you, like look at Rich Abbott, who came through your ministry, and he does Christian wrestling events. I mean, Speedos, the whole thing. It's amazing to the glory of God. I love getting to go to those. Rich is amazing. You know, how has God uniquely gifted and called you to help change your community, your region? Yeah.
I love it, dude. Listen, we're going to wrap it up, and next episode, Eric's going to kind of take us through a little bit more of his story, and I want to talk about what you guys saw in India, because you're doing what you do around the state, you got what you're doing here locally, but you also are telling a story that's happening around the globe, and I got a chance to be a part of a little bit of the interviews afterwards that you're doing with this, and I can't wait for you to tell that story.
Thanks for doing that, by the way.
Absolutely. I just want to encourage you as we're wrapping up is this. Every week I say this, God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far away. And he's created you on purpose. And I've started to add a word here, for his purposes. And if you're at a place right now where it feels boring, it feels stagnant, maybe you've been just beating yourself up that you can't get out of a rut of sin or of struggle, whatever it is, here's what I want to encourage you. I believe the fuel for life change in your life, I believe the fuel for your passion to grow up in your relationship with God, I believe the fuel for you to dive deeper into your in relationships, it's found by pouring your life into his purposes. Your happiness, your paycheck, your goals, you are not a big enough mission to actually bring purpose and meaning to your life, because go back to the first 3 weeks of this series, because your life is a relationship because you were made in the image of a relationship, right? That's what it is when you pour yourself into what he is doing. Be a witness to his story. Step into his relationship, what he's doing to redeem the relationships of the world. That's where life really is. And I hope a little bit of what Eric's saying, something that I'm saying, something the Holy Spirit's saying to you over these 3 weeks of this part of the relationship series just ignites a new passion and a new vision and a new mission for your life. Thanks for downloading, listening, or watching this episode. If you have questions, you can always hit us up. As we say every week, you can text me, 317-550-5070. You can send me emails, Darren@blackbirdmission.com. Or if you want, you can hit us up on the socials, and we would love to be in communication with you. Say, here it comes again. Remember, God's for you, not against you. Near you, not far away. And he's created you on purpose and for his purposes. We'll be right back in a week with me and Eric right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast.